Welcome in to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you on this Wednesday morning. Plenty of things to discuss as we're now a couple of days deep into the offseason for South Carolina. Of course, conference championship games coming up this weekend. We can get into previewing all that stuff as the week goes along. But some very big news coming down yesterday and something to be very excited about. And Chris and I were talking about this yesterday, waiting for it to officially drop. Garnet Trust got a pretty sizable donation yesterday.
Yeah, they did. Anonymous donor has stepped forward, and $1 million match is kind of how we've been talking about this thing. So an anonymous donor has gifted Garnet Trust basically a matching gift. And, you see this in some other collectives have done this in the past, and obviously some other organizations that fundraise on a regular basis. But basically, it's now an opportunity between, I was going to say now, but when this came out yesterday, all new revenues. So upgrades if people are already Garnet Trust members, new one-time contributions, donations to Garnet Trust Foundation, which is their 501c3, one-time contributions to Garnet Trust, all of it. Anything new will be subject to this match. And what that means is, however much that pot is between now and December 20th, which is an interesting date. That is the early signing period beginning for football, December 20th. Anything between now and then will be subject to the match. So up to $1 million. So if people step up and put $1 million in that pot, then the anonymous donor is going to match it up to $1 million. So that could be a $2 million windfall, which is pretty significant.
And I understand the website crashed last night from so many people jumping in on this.
Not the website, just one of the links.
One of the links, okay.
One of the links crashed. So
links crashed.
Yeah, so
there was a lot of traffic to it, obviously.
Yeah, a lot of traffic. My understanding, catching up with those guys a little bit this morning, is that there's been, a pretty big response for this. And not surprising, right? Like, I think a lot of people have been waiting on a variety of things for NIL. How is it going to settle? Is it actually important? Hey, maybe if you're thinking about jumping in, what have other schools done? Or some people admitted, hey, I was waiting on a big opportunity like this, a match opportunity or a donor. And really the amount of things that those guys at Garnet Trust have done, Mark, Jeremy, we have those guys on a lot on the Garnet Trust Hour here on the show. They've really done as much as you possibly can in terms of trying to find new initiatives, sustainable initiatives, working with USC. There's a great relationship there. And so they've done a really good job with all this. And so this is obviously a huge opportunity at South Carolina.
Well, 50-50 raffle was very cool, I thought,
yeah, it was
too.
really cool.
Yep. You got to be creative with this stuff. Shout out to the anonymous donor.
Yeah.
It's got to be pretty cool to just be sitting at home and be like, yeah, that's me. I did that.
It's like the opposite of the lottery winner who won't reveal him or herself.
Yeah,
but
got to be pretty awesome.
And
cool. I don't really know anything about fundraising and how they do it at other places, but smart idea too to be like, hey, I'll give this milli, but I need some other people to step up too. So it does drive that as well, because basically. Your contribution is being doubled, essentially, is how you can think of it if you are going to contribute right now.
Well, yeah, because it creates an incentive for people to, again, if you're just giving your $10 a month or haven't given $10 a month yet, gives you an incentive to become a part of that, as opposed to, hey, somebody gave $1 million to the Garnet Trust. That's great. That's going to go a long way. Well, now they're giving you a reason to get in on it yourself with the match. And as Chris mentioned, this is a potential to be a $2 million swing in the NIL before December 20th, which when we're talking about transfer portal, talking about early signing period, like those numbers are very important in that period of time.
Well, I don't need my Sherlock Holmes hat to realize the timing of this. No. The transfer portal opens on Monday officially, although the portal is already
popping.
Things popping. It's jumping.
People are waiting at the door for it to officially open.
Got to charge a cover, I think, to get in the portal at some point. But the from now to December 20th, as Chris said, early signing day, not a coincidence at all. So good timing there, I think, for South Carolina. And I hope that I hope I'm saying this right. I was reading, Garnet Trust was responding to some stuff on Gamecock Central. I believe if you sign up as a monthly right now and you are new business, basically, that they're gonna assume that you're gonna stick around for a year.
Right.
So it will technically count. So you could give your $10 a month, but that would technically count as contributing $120.
That's right.
Um,
Kind of like a pledge.
yes. So your 120 becomes 240 thanks to this anonymous donor, which is pretty awesome. So I think now, if you're Garnet Trust or if you're a Gamecock fan, the goal should be to maximize this thing and get it to $2 million. You know, I've heard various things around there. People want to know, hey, how much does it take to build a roster? How much does it take to build a top roster? You know, I've heard various numbers just thrown around, but a $2 million windfall, from what I've heard, frankly, I don't think that actually covers a roster at some of these schools, but it makes a big old dent. Like, it makes a huge dent. I've heard, I don't know, Chris, you probably know more. I've heard the word like $5 million thrown around if you want to build like a top 10 roster. That's speculation, but $2 million kind of on top of what you've already been able to do, no question, would go a long, long, long way for Garnet Trust and South Carolina.
And we've heard both Jeremy and Mark talk about it. You know, South Carolina, and these numbers aren't public, as you mentioned. You kind of got to, you know, search around to see what some of these other schools may have or what the rumors of what they have as far as their NIL goes. But Jeremy and Mark have been very open that South Carolina kind of finds itself in that middle ground a little bit in the SEC based on the numbers that they know. And is this going to take them to the top? Probably not, but at least has the potential to jump them up a few spots and be more in that mix or towards those teams that are at the top of the SEC, specifically when you talk about what they bring in NIL.
Yeah, I like the way that Mark put it recently. He said, look, some people want assurances that, you know, participating in the NIL space and South Carolina being healthy from a dollars and cents standpoint, well, forget about the cents, it's just dollars, right? You know, will guarantee success. And you really can't, right? In the same way that if you have great facilities or great academics at your school, or if you hire a staff of big names at your school, those things don't guarantee success either, right? They help you. But what you can guarantee in this new era is if you don't have a healthy NIL environment, you're going to struggle. And we can say, man, I don't like that. Like, I don't like the direction this has gone. I don't like that NIL and marketing activations and all these things are in play in recruiting, and that's fine. Like, I get it, right? If you don't. But this is where we are. It's where we are. It's not the dollars aren't as big or even, frankly, as important as, say, like we're watching NFL in here on these screens. It's not to that point yet. It's a lot different than that. But imagine if an NFL team said, I'm sorry, guys, we just don't really have any money to spend this year. Like, generally, you're going to struggle.
Sure.
And in the NFL and MLB, all these teams, having the highest payroll does not necessarily guarantee success. There's teams that spent tons of money on players in the past that aren't very good.
The Mets in MLB.
The Mets, yep.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. And the Atlanta Braves, by the way, great example of, you know, being not the biggest market team, not having to spend the most money. So you do have to be smart with it. The point is, you have to give the resource game has changed in college football. It's not just about facilities. It's not just about this or that. NIL is an important part of it, and we say it often, but it continues to be illustrated over and over in recruiting. And so, yeah, South Carolina, if they have a really nice NIL windfall, it doesn't mean they're going to go win a national championship the next 2 years. But if they don't have it, they're going to struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the reality of it. And maybe some things tweak and change, some market corrections, revenue sharing coming down. Those things may happen. But this is the current model. This is where we are, like it or not. And it's a must to be really good in this area.
And again, we don't know who this anonymous donor is that gave the $1 million, but the way that they're doing this is very cool, and again allows other people the incentive to get in on it with the match and everything like that. And if this is successful, and again it sounds like a lot of people are jumping in on this, in the first 24 hours since this has been announced, this is successful. Who says that somebody else doesn't do this to an even bigger scale down the line? Like, this could be the start of something if they see this being successful.
Yeah, anonymous donor, if you want to talk, we'll put you on air. We'll even do one of those things like in the movies where we change your voice if you want. Would love to hear from you and your thoughts. But seriously, I mean, I think we already are starting to see the market correct a little bit. And, I think when you look at the amount of money that coaches are being paid to not coach, and then you look obviously at the TV dollars, it's kind of natural to think, all right, is there some type of rev share that could be involved in all this? And I think that's at some point on the way. I think that's coming. But I think what this does for you, if you're South Carolina, particularly if you can drive this thing up to the full $2 million, is it gives you a little bit more of a runway. And I think eventually, Jeremy and Mark talk about it all the time. Eventually, it's got to be sustainable NIL. And that, to me, is more involved. That involves the businesses in Columbia and throughout the state of South Carolina. And to where you're going to have, market deals with return on investment for those businesses and sustainability. But, this gives you a runway for that. I think ultimately, the more I've thought about this, guys, I think part of the equation is when you have players. Now you're going to start to have players that were supported by NIL who are moving on. They were supported for 2-3 years, then 4 years, and then they go on to the NFL. I think part of this equation is, hey, you were supported by NIL at South Carolina while you were in school. Now you got more money than you know what to do with. Why don't you support the next guy at your position or the next big player at your school? So those guys don't exist yet because NIL is so new. You're going to start to sort of steadily have more and more guys in the NFL who were supported their entire time in college, who are now at the next level. So I think that's part of it as well. But ultimately, it's about sustainability, I think, for these markets. And this gives you a runway to continue to kind of get towards that.
Yeah, giving back, I think, is going to become more of a priority here and other places. You've seen some athletes at some places, even at South Carolina, not in a big way here, but there are some that actually are kind of quietly behind the scenes involved in smaller ways that are still meaningful. So to put a bow on this, some people may be wondering, what can I do? So GarnettTrust.com has options for if you want to contribute one time, if you want to join as a monthly member, if you want to join as a yearly member, you can do it there. Garnett Trust Foundation, which is the tax-deductible donation option, 501c3, GarnettTrustFoundation.org. That's where you can go. And I will say, guys, I've been doing some tracking on this, just talking to Mark and Jeremy. The response on this has been not where it needs to be to get to the match, right? That's a lot of money. But it has been the most, I think.
Get an inside look at Hollywood with Michael Rosenbaum.
Let's get into the fascinating, wonderful Bonnie Wright.
Oh, yeah. Ray Fiennes was the most chilling actor to work around.
He wasn't funny and making jokes.
No. A little bit, but in, Voldemort way.
Did you feel like he got very little direction? They let him do what he was just doing?
I'm sure he was probably the type of actor that would go kind of quietly and speak to the director rather than
What am I doing wrong? What do you want me to do?
Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum, wherever you listen.
It's probably been the biggest initiative they've done in terms of interest. Like there's a ton of people signing up right now.
Absolutely. Very exciting, and we'll keep an eye on that as we get closer to December the 20th. But obviously this opens up a lot of doors for potentially what you can do in the transfer portal as well. We'll take a look at some early names that South Carolina is interested in from the transfer portal. Coming up is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the Game, the 107.5 The Game app. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you here on the game, as well as the 1075 The Game app, which you can download on the App Store and listen to us wherever you are. As Chris mentioned a few minutes ago, the transfer portal officially opening coming up on Monday, but if you check Twitter every 5 minutes, there's a new name hopping into the portal, and you guys have been keeping up with this over on Gamecock Central. A couple names already that South Carolina is at least interested in and talking to some degree about who might be able to join the team through the transfer portal, and looking at this list here, as we've talked about, you can't really say no to any position at this point in time, and South Carolina seems to kind of be touching all the bases here with these guys on this list.
Yeah. First of all, we're going to send that music bed into the transfer portal. Anyway.
We've been asking for a while, and nobody's taking the hint,
now Captain Dave's in charge of it. So
Dave, no, he's not in charge.
No, that one's automatic, I think.
Automatic. Flush it, Dave. Find a way.
Yeah, send it to the portal, Dave. Somebody else can deal with it. But anyway, no. So let me first say, the names out there right now are, I think, safe to say, as many names are out there, nowhere near as many names that will be there starting next week.
Yep, sure.
So everybody is jumping in on the bigger names right now. So I think if you see a tweet, hey, South Carolina offered this guy, or you read on Gamecock Central, hey, there's some mutual interest here, South Carolina's going to make a move here. Don't start slotting that guy into your depth chart for next year.
Right.
Like
Come on, Wes.
Well, Chris, I
think
fun. No, it's fun to think about. It's fun to talk about. But just by the numbers alone, everybody we're talking about right now, unless there's a prior connection, is a long shot. Like, just go ahead and consider them a long shot in your head just by the numbers alone. Mm-hmm. Even if you're the favorite behind the scenes, it's still a little bit of a long shot.
That's right. I get you.
Now, I think our lists will adjust as it goes on, and we'll start to, hey, this is the guys. A watch list right now is more, hey, it could become something. I think that's important to point out. Like, I think people start reading these names and are like, well, hey, let's add that guy, add that guy. Important to mention that first. That being said, Chris Mitchell, I think, is the first guy I want to talk about. 1, great last name. 2, great wide receiver.
Literally a combination of your two names.
Yes. And 3, you need at least a wide receiver. I think you need multiple wide receivers, to be frank. But I think in the portal, that's a spot where I look at it and I say, you don't need just a guy. You need a dude. Like, you need somebody who can go make plays for you. And so all those things are not created equal. I think there are certain positions. Would you like to sign the best guy at every single position that's available? Of course. Is that going to happen? Of course not. So there are certain spots I look at where I'm like, that's a spot where you need a true difference maker. Other spots you may say, hey, we'd love to have a difference maker, but just increasing our depth would be beneficial for the roster, for the team. So I think with Chris Mitchell, there's going to be heavy interest there across the country. What do we know right now? Well, he's the top on 3 rated guy in the portal, at least as of last night. That could have changed by today too. But also, there is interest here from South Carolina.
Yeah, I think you made a great point to go back to that on. You kind of have the depth guy versus the star, right? And so you can look at certain positions and outline that, hey, at a certain spot, they're going to need starter caliber players. Like, I think wide receiver is an easy one to point to, right? Even if Juice Wells, that situation works out, everything's followed through on, and he ends up back at South Carolina as he has said he would like to this coming season, there are still plenty of questions in that room, especially after you lose Xavier Legette. So you can look at receiver and say, man, and there's already some good ones in the portal, like Chris Mitchell from FIU, number 1 rated portal player in the country right now. Well, as of this morning, rather, per on 3. A guy that's going to draw, and there's the problem, though. everybody else knows that, right? So he's going to get some big-time offers from big-time schools, set their receiving record, their single-season receiving record at FIU. Like, that's the type of guy that you probably need at receiver, like a difference maker. But there's other spots where, you're just looking to bring in a depth guy, somebody who can come be a really good special teams player for you, somebody who can, maybe be a starter or a part-time starter. I think a good example is like a Nate Atkins, right? When South Carolina brought him in, very little fanfare, ended up being a starter, ended up being a critical player. Wasn't a guy that you brought in and said, man, we have absolutely got to have a starting tight end, right? Mm-hmm. But you take him, and he ends up being a critical piece of the team, a different situation than, say, Spencer Rattler, who you brought in, and, okay, we need a starting quarterback. This guy's our starting quarterback.
He broke the internet.
That's right.
When he committed.
He did.
And yes, Chris Mitchell is still number one right now as far as current guys in the portal as of this moment. Will Howard right behind him. Another guy that is on this list of guys that you listed, Joey Slackman, who is a defensive lineman from Penn, Ivy League guy, number 3 overall on this list of guys currently in the portal right now.
Yeah, Ivy League, very popular right now because they've been able. A lot of those guys, we've talked about this before. They're not allowed to come back for that additional year, and so you have that issue and the fact that if they're graduates, they're already in there. So it is heavily skewed towards that. You obviously, with some of these guys, there's a Mendoza kid, offensive lineman, who is at Yale. So there's obvious connections there with Reno's dad being the coach there.
By the way, that guy looks like a monster.
Yes. Hey, you know what? It kind of, some people, hey, Ivy League, why are you recruiting the Ivy League? I thought Gargiulo kind of summed it up very well. Like, hey, if you built a team with all the guys from Penn and Yale and moved them to the SEC, yeah, it's going to go poorly. But there are guys, like the top guys from those teams can contribute at the SEC level most years. So, I think that's important to remember. The more we see, I truly think you take the guys who have been like ballers at lower levels as opposed to most of the time, as opposed to a guy who was a top 150 player at out of high school and is at an SEC school and just has not done anything for 3 years. Now, not all situations are created equal. We know, like you might have been in an SEC school for 1 year, and let's say you're just at Georgia or something, and you're just blocked. You're not happy, and you're just looking for a new start. Hey, I'll take a chance on those guys, especially the ones that have 3 or 4 years of eligibility. But if you've been in an SEC school for 4 years and you haven't done anything at all, I'm taking the Ivy League guy. I'm taking the JMU wide receiver. I'm taking Nate Atkins.
Yep.
East Tennessee State. I'm taking those guys. Over a big name. Oh, that guy was a 4-star. Okay.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
What have you done lately?
Yeah, doesn't matter.
And like you said, there are some guys that maybe they did need a change of scenery. Maybe something did happen. Talk about some of these former 4-star type guys. Maybe there wasn't a good match at their first destination. So not all are created equal, like you said, Wes. But there's, if you're going to have success in the portal, oftentimes it's going to be, you look at the schools that have done it well, and you even look at some of the examples at South Carolina. It's been some of both. Got some guys that weren't really on anybody's radar, and some guys that were on everybody's radar. And the Rattler Adkins thing is a perfect example of that. So I think if you're looking at what to expect, a lot of people are hoping that South Carolina can, quote unquote, nail the portal. That can come in a lot of different forms and fashions. And it's all about who you get and how they fit in and what they can do for you. So my guess is if we get out of portal season and you kind of look at what the Gamecocks have, if they've done well, it's probably going to be a combination of that, right? Some bigger names, some guys from smaller schools that are ready to make that jump up and are proven producers.
Absolutely. And As the more you refresh Twitter, the more names you'll see jumping in the portal over the next couple days until it officially opens on Monday, and then we can start seeing some guys potentially jumping in to South Carolina at that point in time. We'll keep an eye on it. Men's basketball team in action last night. We'll dive into their 6th win to open up the 2023-2024 season coming up. It's Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
Seconds left. Notre Dame appears like they're okay with just dribbling out the ball. And Micah Shrewsbury is spending the last 10 seconds of the game barking at one of the officials. That will do it. Horn sounds, and you can put Spurs on a 6-0 start for the South Carolina Gamecocks. They down Notre Dame by a score of 65-53 after falling behind to begin this game 8-0 and suffering another 8-0 run to begin the second half by the Irish. The Gamecocks in both halves eventually find their range and pull away for a double-digit win.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Derek Scott on the call last night for the Gamecocks Radio Network. 65-53 win in the ACC-SEC Challenge as South Carolina takes down Notre Dame to improve to 6-0 on the season. I know you guys like to talk about your guy Miles Studi, but we got to talk about Meechie Johnson. 29 points, a career high, 4 of 9 from beyond three. Just an explosive night for Meechie, who's, as usual, been streaky. Has his ups and downs, but last night definitely a high for him.
Isn't that why we love him?
Sure.
When he's on fire, man, this dude is fun to watch. BJ Mack.
Good night for BJ Mack as well.
BJ Mack's just been, I think if Meechie's the kind of, streaky guy that can go off for 25 at any point, BJ has just been kind of a steady force, and the announcers were talking about it. He's obviously kind of made that step up in competition. He's hit the ground just running. Looks comfortable, so smooth, has such a nice touch for a big man. BJ Mack is going to be, I believe if he keeps this up, one of the better players we've seen at South Carolina in recent years, especially, among the big men. He's been fun to watch. And this team has, they've got some players, man. We're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves on, crowning them. 6-0 start, though, is something to be celebrated, I think. And pretty good crowd last night. I know there was a big push from the university to try and, make that thing full. I think, for the most part, had a pretty big crowd, good atmosphere. And impressed the Notre Dame coach, apparently.
Yeah, Shrewsbury said he was out there on the court and saw them file in and
some
said,
S-bombs.
"Oh, blank, what have I got myself into?" And yeah, they certainly played a factor last night. And, Notre Dame got off to good starts in both the first and second half, getting off to 8-0 runs in both of those. But once South Carolina got rolling, they kept rolling. And it wasn't their best night shooting, but still a pretty comfortable 12-point win.
Yeah, about the worst start you could get off to, when you think about it. But when you're missing some shots early, the other team hits a couple of shots, it's not that hard to get down like that. But to their credit, they were able to dig out of it pretty quickly. Playing, had some really good defensive possessions after they settled in, started taking some good shots. And to go back to Mack, I heard Notre Dame's coach Micah Shrewsbury talking about this too after the game. He's just a really tough matchup. He's a unique player. If you watch South Carolina play last night, a lot of times you got, 4 guys behind the three-point arc, and you got Matt kind of in the middle there, but then he can just step out. It just allows you so many opportunities with things to do, offensively. There's one play I remember, and Mac actually didn't even hit this shot, but, Meechie Johnson, because you have to pay so much attention to him because he can shoot, he can get to the rim. He drew a double, very quickly kicked it out to Mack, who can then step behind the three-point line. And that's a shot he knocks down at a very high clip. Or like Wes said, he has the touch to where he can step out on the elbow and hit a jumper. He can obviously go down low. And so I think, look, there's a lot of reasons that this team looks fun and looks like they're going to be so much more competitive than they were last year. A lot of it's the experience that they brought in. You look at all these transfers, some of the guys that have come back and have improved, like Jacoby Wright, like Zach Davis. But BJ Mack, just his skill set being so unique, being able to not just be a presence down low, but step out and hit shots, it just really adds, I think, another element to this offense and to this team.
Well, and they told the story again last night, watching the game on TV about how valuable Lamont Paris knew he could be, to make it a point where, I forget where the team was going last year, but, make it a point to, it was for the win of the SEC championship game, make it a point to be the first coach to visit with him when he put his name into the transfer portal. And that obviously ended up working out for them, but he was obviously familiar with him from his time at Wofford and knew, obviously, a guy that's played a lot of basketball, and just the physical size and what he brings to this team has obviously been a welcomed addition so far to start the season, excuse me. But obviously off to a great start, and it can potentially get even better here soon, as he also revealed last night that Colin Murray-Boyles is cleared to return to start practicing. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be out there Friday night against George Washington. He's got to take some time to get built back up, put a little bit of weight back on, all that kind of stuff. But he should be back in this lineup, sooner rather than later. And we obviously have heard so much about him and what he's going to be able to bring this team when he's back out there on the court.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how quickly he can kind of get back to his old self physically. I think from what I've heard, mono can kind of take it out of you, especially if you're an elite athlete who, you're trying to get back to basketball shape. And, that's different from just getting back to your old self if you're, just a random person in the population. So, I wouldn't put too high of expectations on him right off the bat, but I mean, this kid was all the buzz this summer. Like, everybody was talking about him there. I heard, he was in the starting lineup at times this summer, when they were practicing. So he's someone, at least talent-wise, that fits right in with this group. We'll see how quickly he can get back. But, it wouldn't be a bad thing for South Carolina if they can't, if they can kind of slowly implement him in the next month or so, and potentially add him to this rotation. And I think a lot of Gamecock fans are very excited to see, hey, how does this team match up once you start getting into SEC play, because they have passed all the tests so far.
Well, you got a really, really intriguing matchup, not next game, but the next one, December 7th.
That's right.
You go up to Clemson, who just went on the road and beat Alabama.
Yep.
Last night.
Also undefeated.
That's going to be a fascinating matchup to me. And look, I don't think a little bit of a measuring stick game, heck, for probably both of those schools, doesn't mean that if you're South Carolina, you go on the road and play them, doesn't mean your season's tanked or that you're not going to be able to make some noise in SEC play. But I do think it will give us a better sense of what this program is. It's fair to say that'll be their biggest test yet. And how they perform in that one, I think is going to be very, very interesting.
Do you think the game on Tuesday night served its purpose of continuing to pique the interest of South Carolina fans? I've always had this theory, and I think this continues. It's not a one-game, one-off thing, but I think when you're trying to reintroduce fans to a sport and like kind of build that hype and build that the attention from your fan base, you have these opportunities early on in a tenure of a coach. I specifically remember, obviously, this didn't go the way anyone wanted, but early in the Darren Horn era, there was this huge push to, Garnet Army and all this, and they played an absolute battle with Florida and ended up scoring as time expired to win the game. I don't remember what year that was off the top of my head, but it was like they made this big push to get everybody in the arena. And then team responded, great back-and-forth basketball game. It looked like they were going to win. It looked like they were going to win for most of the game. Florida scores late. South Carolina scores on a full-court pass layup as time expires, and the crowd just goes nuts. And especially for the students who were there, it served to spark them to this was fun.
Sure.
Let me go back. I'm going to go to the next game. The next game. So I think this was an early push from the kind of administration to get people in the seats, and you hope that they say, hey, this is a fun basketball team to watch.
Yeah, they have an exciting style of play, and again, you have the ability to shoot the three ball the way they've been doing it so far this season. That's something that appeals to a lot of people, and we certainly hope they keep that going forward. Again, back in action coming up on Friday night against George Washington at 7 o'clock out at Colonial Life Arena. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. I got a question on the Firehouse Subs text line that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the transfer portal, as well as what's going on with the Garnet Trust. And I feel like you guys would be the perfect ones to answer this. We'll hit that coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.
The football season is underway, and Believe podcasts are talking about it.
When he went home and went to sleep, Michael Parsons was terrorizing him.
Believe has podcasts covering all 32 professional teams and many of your favorite college teams, too.
And to be only producing 15 points a game, that's something that is definitely disheartening.
Sideline to sideline, end zone to end zone.
As a quarterback, I would expect him to be acting like that. Take the accountability. Put that on yourself. Don't put it on your teammates.
Search BLEAV podcasts wherever you listen.
The Game and the 107.5 The Game app. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. Tyler West and Chris along with you. Talked about a lot of things already this morning. Obviously just talked about men's basketball getting off to 6-0 start with the win over Notre Dame, but started off the hour talking about the news with the Garnet Trust and the big anonymous donation they've received with a match up to $1 million for those that donate to the Garnet Trust over the course of the next less than a month, a couple weeks here leading up to early signing day, as well as the transfer portal. And one name that we brought up was obviously Chris Mitchell, the wide receiver from FIU, who is, as of right now, the top-rated portal player until they update the list and maybe a couple people jump in front of him because people are jumping in left and right, it seems. But I'm going to kind of paraphrase this. We have a text on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100, and Charlie is basically wondering, when you have the Garnet Trust, that is the NIL partner for South Carolina, when it comes to recruiting somebody like Chris Mitchell, what are the conversations? What role do they play? How does this come about for him coming to South Carolina and working out an NIL deal?
It can work differently at different places, but just to say how it works here, the NCAA rule is still currently that, NIL deals cannot be used as kind of a lure for a prospect, for lack of a better term, to go to your school. Now, look, conversations about NIL happen, whether
Sure.
it's marking opportunities. In certain instances, there's, some type of, it's kind of like if you're looking for a job, right? Like, what is the salary going to be, type of thing. And those conversations can kind of happen during the course of the recruiting process. But as a general rule, Garnet Trust as an NIL collective is going to get involved after the fact, as far as they're not going to put a transfer portal guy or a high school guy under a contract before they're on campus at South Carolina. And there's a couple sides to that, but the first thing is you're being compliant that way, right? And you're also ensuring that people can't, big concern that we heard about at the outset of NIL, and it still happens, is people, taking the money and run, so to speak. And you certainly don't want that to happen either. So, NIL is a big part of the conversation, whether it's high school recruiting, portal recruiting. It's what we've typically found in covering recruiting is that it's more important on the transfer end. But I've seen over the past couple of days a little bit of a misconception online in that to be successful, you just have to straight up buy players. And that's normally not the case. So, right, let's take Chris Mitchell, since you mentioned him, Tyler. He comes from a great family. His older brother is a Harvard graduate. He's got a younger brother committed to a Power 5 school. He's got another brother that plays at Mississippi State. A great family. And he's a guy that, given his profile and given his social media following, he's going to command some NIL dollars and some marketing activations, and that's fair. I mean, any of us that were a college prospect or a transfer prospect, we'd probably be looking at the same thing. So you need to be able to be competitive there if you're going to go get a guy of his caliber. Does that mean he's going to the highest bidder, quote unquote? No, right? Are there some prospects that may look at the highest bidder? Yes, in some instances, because, again, different prospects and families make decisions for, unique reasons. NIL for most guys is a part of the equation. For somebody like Chris Mitchell, who would get drafted if he left this year, he wants to go back and prove his stock for another season. And so he's looking at development, right, as kind of the biggest piece of that. Will NIL weigh into it? Yeah, you got to be competitive there.
I always look at recruiting, I've said this before, kind of like a pie. Everybody's going to have different pieces of the pie or different sizes. For some of them, NIL may be half of it. Some of them, NIL may just be like, hey, I want to have some opportunities when I get there. I'm really not even concerned about it overall. So every guy is different. I'll say this to Chris's point. I mean, Chris Mitchell, his social following, TikTok alone, he's got 619,000 followers on there. So, yes, there is an NIL component to this, but in actuality, this is one of those where we're kind of talking about a market deal. Well, there are going to be opportunities for Chris Mitchell that would be actual business return on investment opportunities. It's not just, what some people would call pay for play, or, it's not just, hey, this guy is a good football player, so, now his market is this, and this. There's a real market value to him with his social media following. I think Instagram, he's got maybe 30,000 almost on there. But that, to me, is a factor in this as well, if you're a school pursuing Chris Mitchell, which I think a lot of people are going to be pursuing Chris Mitchell.
Yeah, definitely so. And not to compare these two, but you think about somebody like Arch Manning at Texas, who finally got on the field this past weekend, by the way. Like, his NIL potential, it goes far beyond whatever Texas's NIL is bringing to the table. I'm sure there's some element to that, but yeah, brand deals, car dealerships, food companies, whatever it may be, those are the ones kind of coming to a table for a guy like that, where what you're bringing to the table as a specific collective may not necessarily factor into that. But again, it's a good question by Charlie. Thank you for weighing in. Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100. Hopefully that clears things up for you there.
Get an inside look at Hollywood with Michael Rosenbaum.
Let's get into the fascinating, wonderful Bonnie Wright.
Oh, yeah. Ray Fiennes was the most chilling actor to work around.
He wasn't funny and making jokes.
No. A little bit, but in, Voldemort way.
Did you feel like he got very little direction? They let him do what he was doing?
I'm sure he was probably the type of actor that would go kind of quietly and speak to the director rather than
What am I doing wrong? What do you want me to do?
Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum. Wherever you listen.